you were listening along with the gospel, you realize two things. Either it was written a long time ago, or the king who went on a trip went a long distance. Because it was written at a time when banks gave interest on the money. That's almost beyond remembrance, isn't it? But it may come back someday. We might wish that that would be so soon. Today I want to tell you some stories, because I love to read stories and tell stories. These are stories about heroes and saints and us. And I'm not going to try to define what those categories are, because they're very vast. And a hero may be a saint or may not, and a saint may be a hero and may not. And we all have the possibility of becoming saints and heroes, depending on how we define the categories. But my stories come from New York and from Afghanistan, and Pakistan and India and Bangladesh and Atlanta. All over the place. There are saints and heroes everywhere. The first one from New York, when we think of heroes, oftentimes now, even though it's 10 years later, we think of the firefighters who went in the burning towers, trade towers. It was a great sadness, but they all charged up as far as they could get, and then the building fell on them, and that was that. They went because they were sort of brothers in all this, and they went because they were following a command that had been given to them, even though unfortunately the command was in error. But they did what was required of them, and they ended up the way they did. And they are considered heroes. Along that same line, only in reverse, was the Marine Corps corporal who several weeks ago got the Congressional Medal of Honor. He was in Afghanistan. He knew that some of his buddies were a mile away and being in a very difficult situation, along with some Afghan fighters. And he wanted to go and try to rescue them. And he tried 4 times to get permission from the authorities to go do that, and they denied him. And finally he decided to disobey the orders, and he got a vehicle with a machine gun on it and another Marine Corps driver, and they went up and they did the job. Great risk of life and limb, but about 33 people were rescued, some Marines, some Afghans. And they killed a bunch of the so-called bad guys. And for that, now, several years later, he was given the highest award we can give, Congressional Medal of Honor. He reminds me of a person that I never met because he was a long generation ahead of me, who was an Army corporal at Fort Huachuca in Arizona during the Indian Wars, and for some reason, I know not why, he got all riled up and he took a bunch of his troops out and they killed a bunch of Indians. And he got the Congressional Medal of Honor too. They were giving them out more freely in those days. And the reason I know about it is because the Congress decided at some point back in the 50s, I suppose, to put a little medal on the graves of all the Congressional Medal of Honors that they could find around the country. And he was one of them, and I was invited to come and participate in that ceremony. But I don't know what was in his mind any more than I know what's in anybody else's mind when they do something which is considered to be very brave and daring and worthy of honor, and it gets done. Going from there, I think of a man in Pakistan, a Hindu, who's in the paper recently. He's in his 80s. He runs an enormous foundation, millions of dollars, that he spends in different places all around the world. He gave, I think, 100,000 to the victims of Hurricane Katrina, and does that kind of thing. What sets him apart from most other people is that he doesn't own anything. He has one set of clothes. He sometimes sleeps in the storeroom of one of his factories or warehouses. He keeps nothing for himself, and he has the joy. His religion, I think he said, was in meeting the needs of other people. And he finds happiness in that in great ways. Reminds me again of Mother Teresa, who had a Hindu woman of great wealth come to her and say she wanted to help in Mother Teresa's enterprise. But she said, one of my drawbacks is that I enjoy beautiful clothes, and I once a month go out and spend a lot of money on a beautiful set of clothes. How may I help? Mother Teresa thought about that for a while, and then with great wisdom said, well, you spend 800 rupees on clothes once a month. Next time spend 500 rupees and take the other 300 and give clothes to people who don't have. And the woman did that and found to her surprise that it changed her life. She discovered the joy of giving. And she went from spending 500 on them to 400, 300 on down to where she was spending almost nothing on her clothes and giving a great quantity of money to people who didn't have anything. The joy of giving. It was in the paper recently about a taxi driver from Bangladesh in New York City. And he took a couple of clients from a restaurant to their hotel. When they got to the hotel, went up to their room, and she discovered she didn't have her wallet. Well, wallets with photo IDs are very important in these days. She didn't have a way to get home on a plane without a photo ID, which was in her wallet and driver's license. So they all over the place phoned and tried to figure out what to do and how they could get something else and so on for a number of hours. And finally, when they had exhausted everything, they got a phone call themselves that the taxi driver had seen in her wallet the insurance card. The insurance company had phoned her. She phoned the taxi driver. They met in a couple of hours, and everything was given back to her. And the taxi driver didn't want to take anything. He had the joy of giving. Not only that, but he'd gotten a lot of joy because the man, as was his custom, asked the driver where he was from. The driver said he was from Bangladesh. The man said, and had a remarkable memory to remember capitals of cities in Africa. And he said, you're from that city? And the man was just so amazed, so pleased that an American would know the capital city of Bangladesh where he lived. So it was a great joy to be able to give back to this man and the woman what was of need to them. He didn't take any money out of the wallet, anything like that. He was just very happy to give it all back. Which leads me maybe to believe that saints are people who are in process of discovering the joy of giving. Many people are big givers, but we don't have joy in it very much. It's just we write the checks and off they go. But there can be, and a saint is a person who finds the joy of giving and who gives out of abundance and out of that joy. Last one, family in Atlanta with 3 children. And they had a lot of money. He was a mortgage banker. And they had a big house in Atlanta. But they found their lives were not meaningful they wanted them to be. And they had done some missionary things before, but it just kept nagging at them. What did God want them to do? And finally the word came, and what they did was to sell their enormous house, to buy a travel trailer, a motorhome, and to go from that to go city to city for 2 months at a time, connecting up with churches and social institutions of how they could make a difference in those places. And he could continue his mortgage banking. She could do the whole homeschooling for the kids. And they are having a wonderful time. And they were here in the Los Angeles area not too long ago and learning what it was, because they had discovered that it wasn't enough to give things. What they needed to do was to give of themselves. And that's what they were doing, and they'd been doing that for 3 or 4 years, and they're doing it even now. President Obama, in a eulogy to Steve Jobs, said that Steve was someone who was brave enough to think differently and bold enough to think that he could change the world and talented enough to do it. And those could apply to every one of us, that we can be brave enough to think differently, although there's quite a risk in that. People won't like us if we think differently. And bold enough to think we can change the world. Well, we are, in fact, every day changing the world for better or worse, depending on who we are and where we go and how we relate to people, all the different things. We are, in fact, changing the world. And God gives us enough talent to do it. To be brave, to be bold, to be talented. That's what we're called to do. That's what heroes and saints and we are all about in this life. Finally, I know that you did this last week, but I ask you to stand and turn again to hymn 293, which is a commitment on our part to be saints. I sing a song of the saints of God, and I want to be one too.